What I'm about to say may surprise you, but maybe it won't. And it's simply this, that really one of the hardest sermon series or things to do each year is the Christmas series. Now you might be thinking, well, that should be the easiest. Well, yeah, it is in some ways, but on the other side, how do you retell a story that everybody's heard hundreds and hundreds of times? How do you bring new insight, new thought into something that has been visited so many times? So it's really one of the hardest times of the year to prepare a sermon, and not because it's just a busy month, or because I'm a Scrooge and don't like Christmas, or it's not because I spend all my time Christmas shopping, because that certainly isn't the case. Just ask Judy on that one. But it is that challenge. How do you bring something new, something fresh, something that we want to hear to something that has been heard so many times? Now, some of you grew up in a church that probably practiced a lot of things during the Advent season. How many of you grew up with a church that practiced the Advent practices during every Christmas year? And to be honest with you, I grew up in a church where that wasn't the case. I really had not known anything about Advent, all right? And I don't know all the reasons behind that and why they did that, but I think sometimes the Advent calendar and things was seen more as a denominational thing, and I attended a non-denominational church. But lately I've looked at Advent, and I've done some reading about it. I've done some research about it, and it's really a very good thing. It's something that is designed to help us prepare our hearts for Christmas. It's not something you will find in the Bible. I must say that. There's not a chapter and verse that you turn to and said, oh, here's the Advent calendar season thing. It's not there. It was something that the church came up with, they think as early as 400, 500 AD, maybe a little bit earlier than that. And it was meant to help people come to an understanding of Christmas. The word Advent is from a Latin word, adventus, which means coming. It is translated from the Greek word parousia, which is used many times, most times, in the context of the second coming of Christ. So what I'm going to do this month is we're going to spend some time looking at Advent. And my sermons are actually going to be based on the whole Advent calendar, which I've never done before, all right? So bear with me. I hope that you'll all gain something from that as we look at Advent and what it means. You see, throughout history, Advent really talks about the coming of Jesus, but it can be seen in three different lights. One, the coming in the flesh. The prophetic aspect of Christmas, in that the prophets of old promised a coming Messiah. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, people longed for the coming of the Messiah. So the Advent season is a time to reflect on that, to look back and see how the prophecies of old came true in Christ. The second aspect, though, is that the coming of Christ daily into our lives. Because if our faith is nothing more than history, then we're missing something. Our faith, our Christmas celebration, is also a daily coming of Christ into our hearts, that we live with Him on a daily basis. And then the third aspect of Advent is looking for the coming glory or the return of Christ. So those three things I want you to think about all month as we talk about the four different themes that you'll find in the Advent calendar. Today it's about hope. That's the first Sunday. The other three Sundays are faith, joy, and peace. And we're going to visit each one of those and see how the Scriptures talk about those in connection with the coming of the Messiah. It was seen in the Old Testament, it's seen in the present, and it's seen in the future. Now, associated with Advent is the lighting of the Advent candle. And each week, I want at the beginning of my sermon to light the Advent candle. And today, the candle represents light, brings life and hope into a darkened world. I want to read two passages as we reflect on the candle that was lit, and the message for today comes from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2 and verses 6 and 7, and then one from Romans. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with righteous justice and righteousness that from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. And then Romans chapter 12, quoting a passage from Isaiah, the Apostle Paul says, and again Isaiah says, the root of Jesse will spring up, one who will arise to rule over the nations. The Gentiles will hope in him. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Hope. Does the world need hope today? Have you listened to the news lately? You ever watched or read or listen and you think, what in the world is going on here? Hope. It's an interesting word. I don't know what you're hoping for this Christmas. As a kid, you probably had a whole list of things you were hoping for. Maybe your grandchildren or great-grandchildren are giving you their list of things that they hope for Christmas, that new ball or that new bike or that video game. As we grow older, we still have hopes. We don't share them as much. Boy, I'd hope to get a new boat this Christmas, or I hope to get this new car, Our hopes just get bigger. But hope like that is not necessarily biblical hope. The word for biblical hope doesn't necessarily mean to something that we just kind of have no control over or that is an empty longing. The biblical word for hope is one of assurance. That would be a better word for hope. That we look forward to the assurance, the promises. Hope in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, takes in all the promises of God and all the fulfillment of God. So when Paul says there in that Romans passage that may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope. It's based on who God is and what he's done for us. Hope. The world needs hope. I think what we are seeing in our culture today is the manifestation of moral decay. Of years of moral decay, and it just seems to go in waves, and it rears its ugly head in different ways throughout society and culture. And it just seems like we're inundated with all this garbage that's going on. And you have to ask, where is hope? Is there any hope for this world today? There's a group of students at a Catholic high school in Connecticut that after one of the shootings about a year ago, put together a video, and they put this video online. It became somewhat viral and really went out. What is interesting is some called it controversial, right? But it is a video, it's about prayer, but it has a bigger message about God and what we've done with him. Do you get the heart of that? Where is God? Gone. God's gone nowhere. The society has shut the door on Him and tried to keep Him out. And then we wonder, can we bring the lights back up on stage? And then we wonder, why moral decay? Why chaos? The world needs hope. And outside of hope, it's simply an empty longing. See, Isaiah spoke the words of his prophecy to a people that needed hope. In 722 BC, the Assyrians had come from the east and they had gone over to Palestine and they had conquered the northern section of Palestine. There were 12 tribes of Israel. 10 tribes lived in that northern section. And what happened in that is the Assyrians captured, plundered, pretty much wiped out all their cities, and they became known as the lost tribe, or the dispersion, or those who were dispersed, never to come back again. It was during that period that Isaiah spoke up, and God told him, Isaiah, go to the people of the southern kingdom, go to Judah, go to Benjamin, and tell them that their only hope is to come back to me. And the southern kingdom had become embroiled in all the pagan worship and building the false gods and the false temples. And they were also getting wrapped up by their culture, and they were letting culture influence them more than they were influencing culture. And Isaiah comes on the scene and he gives a message of hope to the people of that day. We need that message today. Hope makes such a difference. In 1981, there was a self-made millionaire by the name of Eugene Land. Eugene Land was asked to go back and speak to a group of elementary students. They were sixth graders. It was their graduation ceremony. They were graduating from the sixth grade, going into junior high school. The school was in East Harlem, school number 121. Some 50 years earlier, Eugene Land had attended that school, and he went on to graduate from high school and on to graduate from college and became a self-made millionaire. And now the school was inviting him back, hoping that he would address those students that day and challenge them and encourage them to hang in there, to make something of themselves, to kind of become like him, be successful and all of that. And as he's sitting there, as the ceremony's going on, he's looking out on the faces of 61 sixth graders, and it was obvious that all they were interested in was getting out of there. And he thought, what in the world am I going to say to get these kids to even look at me, let alone listen? And he leaned over to the principal before he got up to speak, and he said, how many of these 61 kids will graduate from high school and go into college? And the principal said, well, probably statistically, about one of them. And he got up, looked at the kids, and just put away his notes and began to speak from his heart. And this is what he said: stay in school. But it's what he said next that changed their lives. He said, stay in school and I will help pay college tuition for every one of you. And for the first time, those sixth grade kids growing up in East Harlem had hope that they could make a difference. Over 90% of those students went on and graduated from high school and went into college. Because that day, that afternoon, this person said something to them that made a difference in their lives. He gave them hope. And Isaiah stepped up and he looked at the people and he said, here's hope. Here's hope. There's one coming. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Everlasting Father, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. You see, the message of Christmas is one of hope. It is wrapped up, it is centered in the divine manifestation of God in flesh on this earth. And Isaiah describes what that looks like to us and to those people. He says, there will come one that's a wonderful counselor. And when Jesus came to this earth and he spoke and he taught, what did the people say? How did they react? At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, it says they were amazed because they had never heard anyone speak to them as he did. Wonderful counselor. One who gives direction. One who gives hope. One who gives encouragement. And Jesus came to this world and he turned that world upside down. His message was not one that would have made the politically correct list from the Jewish times of that era. It was totally different. It was fresh. It was new. And the people were amazed. And yet Isaiah said many years prior to, there's one coming. He's going to give you hope. And he's a wonderful counselor. In him, you'll find hope. He is a mighty God. John chapter 1, verse 1 and 2 says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and nothing was made except that which was made through him. Colossians 1 confirms that. What's that saying? It's saying that Christ was in the beginning with God. He was there the day of creation. He was there when the seas were made and the heavens opened up and the mountains were formed. He's a mighty God. And he became flesh and dwelt among us. He's an everlasting Father. As mind-boggling as that is, everlasting means forever. We're not used to things lasting forever. We can do as much as we can to try to make things last forever. There was a guy in my former church up there that he was great at making things last forever. He had an old Chevy Impala. And man, he took care of that thing, and he kept that. I can still see it. It was black. No, it was a dark green, the black top. And he'd go to Sears. Remember back in the days when Sears would guarantee your exhaust system for life? Well, that's where he had his exhaust system put on, and he'd keep that car, and the exhaust system would run out, and he'd take it back to Sears, and they'd replace it, and he'd keep it for another several years, and it ran out again. He did that so many times, finally Sears, sorry, we can't do that anymore. And he said, well, but it's lifetime. And they said, but nobody keeps a car as long as you do. The refrigerator they had. I saw it once. We were over at the house, and it was this little bitty thing and had this big circle thing on the top. I said, Jim, what in the world is this? Oh, that's my refrigerator. I said, that's an antique. He said, yeah, it still works. Why get a new one? But eventually, that Chevy Impala died and the refrigerator quit working. It wasn't meant to last forever. But God is. A wonderful counselor. Mighty God. Everlasting Father. The same yesterday, today, and forever. And what does he bring? The Prince of Peace. Prince of Peace. Now, the Jewish community in that day, when Isaiah said these words, really probably didn't grasp all of that. But in the days of Jesus, they grasped it, but they grasped it the wrong way. Because they were looking for a king, someone to come and lead their army, lead in battle against the Roman emperor, against the rule of Rome, to bring peace back to their little town of Bethlehem and Jerusalem, the entire Palestinian era. But that wasn't the type of peace that he was to bring. That would have only brought peace on a political, military level. The peace that Christ brings is much deeper than that. It's the peace that only you can find in the midst of turmoil and trouble, and yet you know that God is still with you in the midst of the storms of life. It's that peace that comes only when we face death square in the eye. When that loved one's laying there and we don't understand and we want to make them better, and yet they pass on. And then all of a sudden, we can get a grasp of what the peace of God is. He's a mighty God, an everlasting Father, a Prince of Peace. There's a verse in Colossians chapter 1, verses 19 through 20 that kind of bring it all together. For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through His blood shed on the cross. That verse 10 or verse 19 is an amazing verse. For God was pleased to put His stamp of approval on Jesus? No. To say Jesus is a good guy? You need to like Him? No. It says, for God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him. God in flesh comes to the world through a little baby in a manger and grows up to be a worker of miracles, a teacher never having been heard like before, and then to die on a cross. By making peace through His blood shed on the cross. So as we begin this Christmas season, let's be reminded that there's a lot more to it than what the world has made of it. It's a message of hope. Hope that is based on the past, the prophecies of Christ, that give us a foundation to stand on. Because we've seen the truth of God's promises and those fulfilled. It's a foundation to stand on. It is a hope that's found in the present, the reality of Christ. It gives us the strength to live on. Jesus said, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. The peace that passes all understanding. That's what hope is all about. And it's a hope that points to the future. The promise of return of Christ. That gives us something to live for each and every day. So I hope that you have a wonderful Christmas. And I hope that you get everything that you want. But I hope that you understand what hope really is. Let's pray.